Game Analysis with Timothy Bailey.
All right, we're here with Timothy Bailey. He's going to analyze the national championship game tonight between Bama and Georgia. How you doing, Timmy?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Doug?
Pretty good. Pretty good. Just excited for tonight.
I bet, man. I mean, these last 5, 6, 7 years for you Bama fans have been about as good as you could ask for. It's been really exciting down there in Tuscaloosa for a long time now.
Yeah, I'm not complaining. And I know this kind of stuff. It's once in a lifetime time type stuff. I mean, even the Bryant era wasn't really like this.
No. And that's what people forget. I mean, Alabama's been, for the last 5 or 6, if we're going to talk about in general speaking, obviously there have been teams that have been better in a specific year than Alabama, but to be as good as they have for basically a whole decade is kind of uncharted territory. I mean, every year they're either the best or you have to beat them to be considered the best for about 10 years now, and that's rare.
Yep, and that's exactly what we're experiencing with this UCF thing this year, and it's Alabama fatigue. And if I was not an Alabama fan, I would hate Alabama.
As an Oklahoma fan, I actually, I respect Alabama, but I also have one of those cornerstone programs that I'm a fan of, and so, this kind of stuff is just kind of expected from the Blue Bloods. I mean, when you look back at the history of the game from, I believe it was like 61 to 79 or something, only the Blue Bloods won championships from that era, and it's just kind of, you've had your here and there moments, but for the most part, the Blue Bloods have dominated the sport, and right now it's kind of Alabama's turn. Some people think it might be turning to the end, though, which I'm not sure how, but tonight will be a big one. Obviously, Georgia and Alabama are both in the SEC, and they did not play each other this year because they're cross-divisional opponents, and Alabama finished tied, but losing the tiebreaker to Auburn in the SEC West, so they weren't invited to the championship game in the SEC. But they are 12-1, earned their way into the playoff, and then beat a team that a lot of people thought was the best team and the favorite going into the college football playoff.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because I've had a lot of people tell me that Clemson was favored in the game, which they weren't. Bama was actually favored, but the overall sentiment was that Bama was not going to beat Clemson. Right.
In terms of Vegas, Vegas is an interesting thing anyways. It's really hard to pick against Bama. They don't like losing money out there. They don't pick against Bama very often.
Right.
But that being said, the sentiment of what it seemed like is everyone said, man, Clemson's been the best team all year. I kind of opposed that idea a little bit. I didn't think the ACC was as strong this year, so I thought they were kind of just the better of the teams in the ACC, which is not every conference was pretty solid this year besides the Pac-12, but I just didn't think that Clemson was as good as people thought they were. And Alabama showed that, but it's also, you got to give credit to Alabama because, first of all, Alabama won the game because they were the better team, and actually somewhat in despite of their quarterback play.
Right.
And that's kind of how dominant their defensive unit is and the other pieces of their offensive unit. Now moving, kind of the segue that with Georgia. Georgia had a very different route to the championship game this time around. Well, I should say this time around. It's been a long time since the Georgia Bulldogs have been relevant nationally in terms of a national spotlight. But they've sure made the most of it, wouldn't you say, Doug?
Absolutely.
I mean, first of all, Georgia deserves a ton of credit. They lost to Auburn and Jordan Hare, and everyone kind of thought they wrote them off at that point and said their season's done, it's over. It was a good ride anyways. They have a freshman quarterback. It's kind of the sentiment. That's the sentiment people had at that game, after that game, and then after they defeated Auburn, in the rematch in the SEC championship game, it was kind of like, but Auburn wasn't 100%. Does Georgia really belong? But when pedal hit, when everything was on the line and all the straws were in a row and everything like that, Georgia, down 17 points in the Rose Bowl, came roaring back, and in the biggest moments, they delivered. Their freshman quarterback delivered, their defense delivered, their running backs delivered, and as a complete unit, including their coaching staff, they delivered in the biggest spotlight in the Rose Bowl, and what many people are calling the greatest Rose Bowl ever played. I don't know about that. The one last year was pretty special too. But obviously, Georgia has also a lot of seniors on this team. A lot of people are forgetting that. Alabama's a relatively young team overall, I would say, and Georgia really is not.
Yeah,
Alabama does have some depth guys that are seniors and juniors, but a lot of their mainstay guys are, they're young pieces. Georgia's a pretty experienced unit besides their quarterback.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I totally agree. What we're looking at as far as their seniors is Mark Richt's last couple classes, which were Mark Richt always recruited well. Not to the level that Kirby's recruiting now, but you want to go ahead and break this game down by position?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the biggest, most interesting storyline for this game, position-by-position matchup, is going to be the Alabama offensive line, which is among one of the best in the country. I know Georgia's heard this before because they did deal with the Notre Dame and the Oklahoma offensive line, versus the Georgia defensive line, who, like we've said, they've had some big games this year, but they haven't always been consistent at getting in the backfield and getting tackles for loss and things like that, against an Alabama unit who's been very good down the stretch. Towards the end of the season, I mean, they've looked fantastic. It doesn't really matter who they plug in at running back; they're going to get their yards. This is what it seems like so far down the stretch for the Crimson Tide. So I think that'll be an interesting matchup.
Yeah. Expounding on that, I really look at Alabama and Georgia running backs as equals. I mean, it's kind of a wash, but the difference is definitely Bama's offensive line.
Yeah, definitely. I think when you look at the running backs, it is just about a wash. I do think that Chubb and Michelle maybe have a slight edge in terms of talent over Damian Harris and Bo Scarborough.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't argue with that.
Since Bo hasn't quite been the same as he was last year so far this year. But that being said, they don't have to go against each other on the field at the same time.
Right.
Speaking of the other trench warfare, if you notice the film of the Oklahoma-Georgia game, Georgia dedicated extra blockers to the side of Oklahoma linebacker Obo Okoronkwo. Season they've struggled. Their tackles have struggled throughout the year. Obviously, the strength of the Georgia offensive line is in the middle and their guards and their center.
Mm-hmm.
Their tackles are a bit of a weak spot. So that's something to look out for. If Alabama is able to stop the run and make Georgia one-dimensional, we could see Fromm get hit a whole lot. Because Georgia, unlike Oklahoma, Alabama has a lot of talent on the defensive front and on the edge than Oklahoma has, where they just have Obo Okoronkwo, where you just got to keep an eye on him. Alabama has too many pieces and too many things where you can just dedicate an extra blocker to one side and be okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be interesting to see how the offensive line, especially the right side, which is full of freshmen, how the right side handles this Alabama front. Their business for the most part all year, but this is kind of a different test than what they've dealt with so far this year in terms of an opponent's defensive line. Obviously, they've faced talented ones. We mentioned Oklahoma, Notre Dame, Auburn. They've faced talented fronts, but they've not faced anything like the Alabama defensive front, and I don't think that should be understated at all. So we'll have to see. They're going to have to learn on the fly, and they're going to have short memories because they're going to have some plays where they give up tonight. They're going to give up some plays tonight, but they're going to have to be good as a unit for Georgia to beat Alabama, because the key to me for Georgia is Jake Fromm throwing to Wims and Godwin. That's going to have to be the difference if Georgia wants to beat Alabama tonight. So that offensive line has to hold up and has to give Jake Fromm the time to throw.
Smacking Off invites you to join us on the podcast. If you have an opinion on an upcoming game, some commentary on your conference, or want to roll with one of your fellow smackers on air, hit us up. You can message us at the Smacking Off or X's and O's Facebook pages, email me at maddenShannon@toothfairy.com, or call us on the Smack line, 304-508-BAIT. And as always, fuck your team.
I'd heard you mention maybe in an earlier episode that you would give Georgia the slight edge in quarterback, but Bama the edge in receiver. So that's going to be an interesting. Not that that's a direct.
Well, Alabama, yeah, they don't directly play each other, but it definitely matters. Calvin Ridley has the big play ability. He can take it over the top. He can take it to the house from the screen game. He has something that those other receivers just don't have. I mean, there was a point in time. Alabama, let's just put it this way. Alabama's so deep at wide receiver, they don't know what to do with some 4- and 5-star guys. Brought in an athlete that they intended to play corner and switched him to wide receiver. Alabama has so many, they struggle to put some 4- and 5-star guys on the field, short-handed at wide receiver, that tended to have come in and play corner for them, wide receiver. So I'm simply saying that, Alabama has a wide margin.
Who has the edge at secondary corners and safeties?
Well, there's this one guy, when you look at both of these teams on film, they're secondary, and that's Minka Fitzpatrick from Alabama. I hate to be so Alabama heavy in this segment. Did win the SEC, so they deserve a lot more credit than it feels like I'm giving them in this segment, but been here for a long time for a reason. And Minka Fitzpatrick is one of those reasons. I mean, that guy can cover, he can tackle in space, he's good supporting the run, he can play safety, he can play corner. I don't like Georgia's corners. For their safeties, I think that they're good, but not if Jalen Hurts, can have one of those type of performances that he has from time to time, and throw the ball in there. He doesn't have it often, but if he has one against Georgia, I don't think that Georgia has a chance, because Alabama will eat all night against those DBs if they are given a chance.
Yeah, I don't disagree. But the big question is what kind of performance do we get out of Jalen tonight?
I find both of these quarterbacks fascinating, because Jake Fromm has everything you can ask for in terms of tools. He's the perfect size. He has a great arm. He's really smart. He makes a lot of great decisions. And his ball placement is excellent, especially for a true freshman. But then on the flip side, Jalen Hurts is only a true sophomore. And a lot of people have kind of thrown him by the wayside, saying, this guy's not as good as his backup, Tua Tagovailoa, which I don't know if I pronounced that right, but we'll hope so.
You know what? I can't pronounce it either. So I don't know. You may have actually pronounced it correct.
Anyway, Jalen didn't come out of high school as a pure pocket passer. Alabama knew what they were getting with him. They were getting a guy who moves with his legs, who has a strong arm, and who has the ability to play as a good passer. But he's not consistent, and that's something that Alabama knew going into it. But the thing is about Jalen that he has everything else. He has the it factor. He has that cold calming feeling. When Jalen Hurts has the football, you might not see him light up the scoreboard, but he's not going to make a mistake, and he's not going to put his team in a detrimental situation. And that's what I'll say about Jalen. He's a good leader. He's very good with his legs. And that's another interesting thing. Georgia doesn't see that many quarterbacks that are great with their legs.
No, you're right.
Either. And neither does Alabama. There's a reason why Alabama has struggled in the past with those players. To be honest, this is a mirror. This really is a mirror. I mean, you look at these two teams, they're built with the same fundamentals. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're a power run team that plays defense first. And, their secondary actions are pretty good. I've seen Alabama hang tight with some high-scoring squads. I've seen Georgia do it last week. Mm-hmm. So, what they're doing there, the coaching philosophies are similar. It's obvious why. Kirby Smart coming from that Saban tree. Now, my interesting question is, let's say Kirby Smart and the Bulldogs pull off this victory tonight. Mm-hmm. Does that not necessarily hurt Saban's legacy, but does it really give a lot more credit to Kirby for what Saban's done?
Absolutely. This is a big game for that reason. It should be for the Bama faithful, because right now it's looking, especially in the recruiting department, that Kirby was a big part of what was happening at Alabama, because Alabama hasn't looked the same. They got consensus #1 last year, but this year they've had a lot of problems, and most of it has been going head-to-head with Georgia and Kirby.
Now, I will say this. Alabama started off slow in this recruiting process, and they were in the 50s. There was a time where Kansas was recruiting better than Alabama. Mm-hmm. We all knew that would change.
Right.
But Alabama is still going to finish with a top 5 class.
Right.
Which is significant. Sometimes fresh blood in a new place helps. Remember Tennessee was recruiting really well with Butch Jones?
I do.
Yeah, and you've seen what's changed since Lincoln Riley's gone to Oklahoma. I mean, Oklahoma classes were around the 15 mark for the last few years, and then now they're top 6, 7 the last couple of seasons. Oregon with Willie Taggart, they caught fire. I think if you look at this is kind of a sidebar, but recruiting, the one team that I'd be concerned about if I was at recruiting is looking at LSU because they have too much in-state talent to not be a top 5 recruiting power every year, and right now they're not under Coach O, so that's something that they need to look out for. But that's for a different day.
Absolutely.
I think the other thing that Alabama needs to consider in the future, not necessarily running a spread. They do run they run a pro spread now, where it's not just a straight pro-style I formation type. They're not that kind of team anymore. They are more of a pro spread,
right?
Which has helped them. But NFL guys, they don't always. The NFL guys they bring in, those aren't always the guys that that the recruits want to talk to. They want to talk to the guys that are like them, the young guys, the younger. And Kirby Smart had that thing about him.
Right, exactly.
He related to his players, and I think that could hurt long term. Obviously, for a while, Alabama's going to be around. Even if Alabama was to lose to Georgia next year, let's say in the SEC championship game, they're going to be at like 5 or 6, even if they're not in the playoff. These teams are going to be in the mix for the 4 teams that you saw tonight, alongside Ohio State. Those are going to be the teams in the mix for years to come. And there's a reason why.
Agreed. One more thing that could play into this game that we haven't talked about is special teams and how these 2 units,
trying to break my heart. The Georgia special teams has been really good.
Absolutely. In the field goal department, Georgia takes this.
Yeah, blocking field goals, making field goals, Georgia has that. Punting is clearly in the favor of Alabama. Georgia's punting isn't bad at all. Georgia's punter is very good, actually. But let's not kid ourselves. J.K. Scott is,
Yeah, he is. He's
not declaring for the draft a year early like the Texas punter is, but he's pretty dang good.
Yes. I still give the edge to Georgia in special teams as far as being
they make the big plays.
Being an X factor that could impact the game. Of course, if J.K. Scott punting on par with his usual self, then we're looking, that's going to be a field position issue for Georgia maybe. But the X factor in the special teams goes to Georgia with their kicker and their ability to block kicks.
Their punt unit's been pretty great too. Just something I took away from the Rose Bowl. Austin Seibert usually averages about 45 yards a punt.
Yep.
And in this game, Austin Seibert, if you remember, had punts of 28, 29, 30, and 33 for Oklahoma. That's really uncharacteristic of him. But it was the intimidation factor, I believe, of the Georgia punt unit that caused a lot of those problems. You wanted to get the ball out quicker. You wanted to do things in a faster motion. You wanted to make sure that the return men didn't get the chance. So, the special teams unit for Georgia, they have that factor of intimidation, but they've also made the plays to back it up as well. So,
right.
Huge. I mean, and their kicker hit a 55-yarder in the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, I've seen that. That blew my mind. I really didn't think he would make it.
I thought that they were losing their mind to try to kick it.
Yeah,
but
and I was thinking he's going to have to kick low. If I'm Oklahoma, I'm getting my hands up in the air because those are easier kicks to block for sure.
Raid's here! Raid!
Yes, Raid. New bug killer discovery from Johnson's Wax. Raid contacts and kills all kinds of bugs indoors. Raid hunts them down like radar. Sweeps bugs from the air. Attacks them as they crawl. And kills them dead. A little goes a long way. Kills bugs even where they hide. Yes, Raid kills flies, mosquitoes, roaches, ants, all kinds of bugs indoors. Outdoors, Raid protects your garden, too. A little kills insects that attack flowering plants, evergreens, vegetables. Caution, ordinary household sprays kill plants. Raid saves plants. So don't buy several bug killers. Get Raid, first bug killer for house and garden. Raid House and Garden Bug Killer.
I'm still going to have it.
I'm the greatest spectacle of all the things that earth right now.
No, wait. Okay, all right, fellas, time out. Come on, give me a second here. Fellas, pause. Just give me a second, man. Pause. Pause. Give me a second. Let me pause. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what it's all about here at SmackDown.
Yeah, what's impressive is Georgia's kick. They're blocking the close-up kicks. That sounds impossible. They're literally bullying offensive linemen on the field goal units of teams and getting in there and putting their hands on the ball. That's impressive. I mean, it really is, and it's an X factor, something you have to keep in mind. Sure, do I expect to see a block kick tonight? I certainly don't. But you can't count it out.
You never know.
Right.
And like I said, Bama has the edge in punting, but it's not a tremendous edge. It's pretty close actually.
Right. Now here's another X factor. Alabama in the red zone as a defense is fantastic.
Yep.
Georgia is not an excellent red zone defense.
Yep, that's definitely an X factor as well.
Now in the Rose Bowl they said Georgia had an excellent red zone defense, but I was like, Reese, that's not correct. He does not, or Chris, he doesn't have it. They don't have an excellent red zone defense. They're 81st in the nation.
Right.
So
I got you.
That'll be another.
I know you've picked on this game already on another segment, but here we are, right here before the game. Let's get another prediction out of you, and we won't hold you. If it's different than one of your other predictions, then we'll just forget about it because this is game day, man.
Right. Yeah. Some things have changed. I'm going to root for Georgia in this game. I'd like Georgia to win.
Right.
I'm tired of Alabama getting just a little bit further and further away, separating in those championship departments. But my brain's telling me that it's going to be Alabama winning. Now, the score's different than what I said before. I think this is going to be a hell of a game. I really do. As I thought about it more, I'm just like, this is a mirror. This is not the same thing as Alabama beating up on normal pro-style teams just because they're not good enough. I think this will be a game that the first 1 to 20 probably wins, and I'll say Alabama's that first 1 to 20, and they win 24 to 20.
Wow! At
the very end of the game, Jalen Hurts delivers a touchdown pass at the end to win the game.
That's pretty close to what I predicted. I predicted 27-21 Bama in a. I think it'll be an eventful game. I think Georgia's going to have some big plays, and I don't know. I think Georgia may block a kick.
But another thing that's shocking to me is that you look at Alabama. Alabama, most of this season, was clearly a top 20 offense in the nation, and they have not played like that for the last few weeks of the season.
Right.
And so that's what makes me think this game is closer. If the Alabama offense that we saw early in the year plays, I don't know that Alabama could lose to any team in the country. But they're not going to, but their defense is so good that, they can win games without their offense being great. But here's the thing. They're good at keeping the ball. Neither are great at getting takeaways. Alabama a little better than Georgia. Who is going to get the takeaway that decides this game? Who's going to get it? Who's going to get it? Because neither of them give the ball up.
Well, that's what I was talking about a second ago with the possibility of Bama getting a kick blocked.
Right.
And they're going to be lucky if it just gets blocked and Georgia takes over right there. The problem with block kicks is sometimes they go back for TDs. And something like that in a game like this could be...
That's a 10-point swing.
It could be
10-point swings matter a lot in football.
Absolutely. It could be tremendous. But anyway, I'm keeping my fingers crossed as a Bama fan, and I'm really looking forward to the game. Man, we really appreciate your insight.
Still a little heartbroken about my Sooners losing, especially in such a wild game, but they made it tonight. After facing back-to-back opponents that probably aren't the best matchup for them, and after that crazy Rose Bowl, they deserve a hell of a ton of credit. I'm just going to leave it at that. It's an uphill battle, I think, for them to win tonight. But if they do, watch out, because this team's not supposed to be here. This Georgia team's not supposed to be here tonight.
True.
So if they win tonight, to be witnessing a first in Georgia.
Absolutely.
They could become a dynasty.
Absolutely, because, this is second year, and you see what Kirby's doing, so... It's
far ahead of schedule.
It looks very much like Alabama did in the first 2 to 3 years of Saban's tenure.
This reminds me a ton of the 2009 Alabama team, except I think this team's better than that team.
Maybe. But anyway, I appreciate it, Timothy, and we'll talk to you next week.
All right, sounds good.
All right, bye-bye.
Have a good one. Enjoy the game.
Please subscribe to our channel by clicking the small smacking off icon at the top of the screen now. Click the link at the bottom of the screen to watch last week's episode.